The afternoon sun gently illuminated Washington, D.C., casting a golden hue over the city. In a luxurious apartment not far from the White House, 27-year-old Karoline Leavitt, the youngest press secretary in American history, was gathering her thoughts. As she stood, adjusting the navy blue blazer draped over her chair, the small silver cross pinned to the collar sparkled, a cherished token of her faith and her New Hampshire upbringing. Suddenly, her phone rang. It was President Trump. His voice was urgent, direct. "There's a religious case at the D.C. local court," he said. "A group of Christians is suing because they've been prohibited from praying in public. Go now. Observe. Report." There was no time for questions or hesitation. Karoline's instincts kicked in. The neatness of her apartment, with its perfectly aligned documents and business suits, mirrored her sharp, disciplined mindset. But for this assignment, she chose something slightly more casual: a crisp white shirt, tailored black pants, and the same navy blazer with a cross. As Trump's spokesperson, Karoline was no stranger to high-stakes moments, but this case resonated deeply with her beliefs. Sliding into her sleek black SUV, she navigated through the city's bustling streets. NPR played faintly on the radio, but she turned it off, choosing silence to focus. The nature of this case was unlike others: personal, layered, and unpredictable. Arriving at the courthouse, she entered through the glass doors and was instantly met with chaos. The heat inside was oppressive, and the murmur of voices clashed with the constant clicking of keyboards at the clerk's desk. Citizens were packed into the waiting area, handling all sorts of minor legal issues, traffic violations, tenant disputes, and more. She checked the time: 2:53 p.m. Just minutes before the hearing she was assigned to monitor would begin. Karoline chose a wooden chair in the middle row, resting her document bag on her lap as she opened her phone to take notes. The silver cross on her collar shimmered under the harsh fluorescent lights, though she didn't notice the curious glances it drew. The room was small, poorly ventilated, and the disorganized crowd made it feel even more cramped. A man to her left wore a T-shirt boldly stating, "I am king," as he aimlessly fiddled with his phone. To her right, a young woman with an oversized, glittering necklace whispered to her lawyer. Karoline frowned. The dress code seemed unusually lax for a courtroom. Still, she kept her attention on the matter at hand. She was here to observe a pivotal legal moment, a case that could serve as a major talking point for Trump's base. The wooden door behind the judge's bench opened, and in stepped Judge Charles Harrove. At 62, with meticulously combed salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose, he radiated strict authority. His black robe looked freshly pressed, and his expression was unreadable. "All rise," boomed James Wilson, the tall and imposing bailiff. Karoline stood with the others, phone still in hand, eyes locked on Harrove as he took his seat. He struck the gavel sharply. "This is a court of law, not a place for personal displays," he announced, his voice deep and commanding. Then he began moving swiftly through the docket, one case after another. A man fined $50 for illegal parking. A woman facing eviction. Karoline noted how Harrove ruled with cold efficiency, barely acknowledging the people before him. She glanced around, noting again how he paid no attention to the man in the T-shirt or the woman with the flashy necklace. But then his gaze fell on her. He paused, squinting as if trying to place her. "Miss Leavitt," he said icily, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder as others began to realize who she was. "That cross," Harrove pointed at the gleam on her collar, his tone sharpening. "It has no place here. Courtrooms are neutral zones, not venues for faith displays." Karoline stayed calm. She scanned the courtroom. There were no signs prohibiting religious symbols. Her voice was steady. "I'm Karoline Leavitt, White House Press Secretary. I'm here to observe a case for official duties. This cross is a personal symbol, protected by the First Amendment. There's no regulation against it. Harov's face darkened. This is not the venue for that. It's disruptive. The courtroom is neutral, not a church, he snapped, banging his gavel again. Nearby, Mrs. Thompson, the court clerk, stopped typing and looked over intrigued. James Wilson, the bailiff, watched silently, his expression unreadable. The man in the I am king shirt and the woman with the glittering necklace whispered to each other, clearly surprised by the judge's sudden fixation on Karoline. She remained standing, gripping her phone. In that moment, she realized Judge Harov wasn't just targeting her. He was targeting the symbol of her faith. "Sir, I have the right to wear it under the First Amendment," she said firmly. Harov interrupted. "Don't lecture me on the law. Approach the bench now." The room stiffened. Karoline took a quiet breath and stepped forward. Her heels tapped softly on the wooden floor, echoing in the silence as all eyes turned to her. The silver cross on her collar gleamed under the courtroom lights, small but unmistakably powerful. Karoline didn't flinch. She moved a step closer to the bench, her hand firm on the edge as she looked straight at Judge Hargrove. "I'll pay the fine," she said calmly, "but this conversation is far from over." Hargrove's smirk faltered. Karoline Leavitt, standing at the defendant's stand with a silver cross pinned proudly on her blazer, was no ordinary courtroom visitor. Moments ago, the judge had issued a $500 contempt charge, clearly pleased with himself. But now that confidence began to crack. The room quieted. Mrs. Thompson, the stenographer, paused her typing, visibly tense. James Wilson stood with his arms folded, intrigued. "You heard me, Miss Leavitt," Hargrove repeated. $500. Pay it now and take your seat." He slammed his gavel, but Karoline stood her ground. "Before I sit, I need to clarify something for the record," she said, her tone calm but firm. "You don't get to demand anything in this courtroom," Hargrove snapped, though his voice shook. Karoline slowly pulled a card from her bag and held it up. "My name is Karoline Leavitt. I serve as the press secretary for the President of the United States. What you may not know, Your Honor, is that I also have an extensive understanding of the law." Gasps echoed throughout the room. A man wearing an "I am king" shirt leaned forward. A woman in gaudy jewelry whispered to her attorney. Hargrove froze, his gavel midair. "That title doesn't excuse you from court rules," he muttered. Karoline stepped toward the podium. "This isn't about court rules. It's about bias. I'm here on behalf of a group of Christians who've been denied their right to pray publicly. This cross I wear," she touched her collar, "is protected under the First Amendment." "You're not here to lecture me," Hargrove said, trying to regain control. "I'm here to remind you of the law," Karoline responded sharply. "In Church of Lukumi Babalu I versus City of Hialeah, the Supreme Court ruled that targeting religious symbols without clear cause violates the Constitution. So, is your objection based on the law or your personal bias?" The silence was deafening. Phones discreetly clicked. Mrs. Thompson's fingers hovered over her keyboard. James Wilson looked impressed. "You fine me for a cross," Karoline said. "Yet that man's shirt violates decorum, and that woman's jewelry is just as visible. Why single me out? This isn't about courtroom order, it's about prejudice." "You're defaming me." Hargrove barked, but his voice faltered. "I've recorded everything," Karoline said, "and the White House has been notified. If you believe a $500 fine will silence me, you're mistaken." A voice from the back shouted, "She's right." Applause began before James Wilson signaled for silence. Hargrove tried to salvage the situation. "Miss Leavitt, I can rescind the fine. Let's not escalate this." "No, sir," she replied. "Withdrawing the fine now only proves you acted improperly. I demand a review of this court's record, 6 months of fines related to religious symbols, and I recommend First Amendment training for your entire staff, including yourself." The courtroom stirred again. An elderly man stood and clapped. "That's justice," he said. Mrs. Thompson resumed typing, eyes wide with realization. James Wilson gave Karoline a subtle nod of respect. Hargrove sat down, hands trembling. He saw now that Karoline wasn't just a defendant, she was a force. "Do you think I'm just a spokesperson?" she asked, her voice softer now, but no less powerful. "I've stood by the president through countless legal battles. I studied law to help defend him, and now I use that knowledge for myself, and for those who can't speak up." She placed her government ID on the bench and stepped back, her eyes locked on the judge. He had no words. The crowd erupted again. People clapped, whispered her name. Mrs. Thompson typed faster than she ever had in her life. James Wilson stood closer, admiration clear on his face. Hargrove shrank into his chair, the gavel forgotten in his lap. Karoline walked out into the bright D.C. sunlight. It was just past 3:30 p.m., but the firestorm inside the courtroom had only begun. She checked her phone. The recording had been successfully sent to the White House with a short message. "Fine for the cross. Handled. Next steps." This was no longer just personal. It was national. Inside, conversations buzzed. "I've never seen a judge shut down so fast," an older man whispered. "That's the White House press secretary," a woman gasped. Mrs. Thompson opened a drawer and pulled out an old notebook, cases where religious symbols had been unfairly punished under Hargrove's watch. She picked up her phone and dialed a journalist. "I've worked under him for 12 years. That young woman was right." James Wilson gathered his co-workers. 20 people fined for religious reasons this year, and he lets vulgar shirts slide? Enough's enough. "I'll call the press," a colleague replied. "This needs exposure." By 5 p.m., a local news anchor stood outside the courthouse. Today, a high-ranking federal official challenged a courtroom fine over her cross and left the judge speechless. Online, the hashtag #CrossingCourt exploded. Personal stories poured in. "He fined me $200 for a prayer pin. He told me to remove my cross during a custody hearing." A short courtroom clip of Karoline went viral. Her standing tall, White House ID in hand, quoting constitutional law. Over 1 million views rolled in within hours. Back in her parked car, Karoline called her husband. "You're not going to believe what just happened," she said, smiling. He laughed. "You always manage to stir things up. Stay safe." A notification popped up, an email from the White House. "Press conference at 7 p.m. We're turning this into a victory." Meanwhile, in his dim office, Judge Hargrove stared at a silent phone. The Judicial Council had reached out. Reporters were calling. Former colleagues, too. He muttered, "She's just a kid. How did this happen?" But deep down he knew. He had underestimated her. And now the nation was watching. 3 months later, Karoline Leavitt once again stood at the White House podium. Camera flashes flickered like stars around her, and the silver cross on her navy blazer gleamed under the lights, a small symbol now recognized by millions. In front of her sat journalists, TikTok influencers, and representatives from various religious communities, all eager to hear her message on religious liberty. 3 months ago, I was just doing my job," she began, her voice steady and clear. "But when a judge penalized me for my faith, I knew silence was an option. That moment forced a reckoning, and we've since transformed the system." The crowd burst into applause, some holding signs reading #CrossingCourt, while others simply stood, nodding in support. At the D.C. local courthouse, a new plaque now stood proudly in the lobby. "Justice honors all faiths." Nearby, Mrs. Thompson and James Wilson continued their efforts in court oversight, ensuring transparency and fairness across the board. Karoline later received a heartfelt letter from a young law student. It read, "Miss Leavitt, your courage inspired me. I'm launching a free clinic to defend people discriminated against for their beliefs. Thank you for lighting the way." Reading those words before her mirror that evening, She felt a wave of purpose wash over her. One act had sparked a movement that was growing far beyond the courtroom. Judge Charles Harrove, now retired, had taken on a new role as a volunteer instructor in judicial ethics training. Facing a room of young legal minds, he humbly admitted, "I once let my personal biases cloud my judgment. Karoline Leavitt helped me see the truth. Justice must always be impartial." His transformation from enforcer to educator added depth to the reform narrative. That same evening, a phone call came from Trump. "Karoline, you're a warrior," he said. "Keep leading this charge." She looked out over Washington from the White House balcony, the sun setting behind the Capitol. The cross in her hand wasn't just jewelry anymore. It was a flame, one that had ignited a national shift. "Freedom doesn't happen by chance," she whispered. "It demands people who are willing to fight for it." Just then, a message arrived. The Judicial Council had officially invited her to lead a nationwide reform commission aimed at eliminating systemic bias in the courtroom. Without hesitation, she accepted. What began as a single act of resistance had blossomed into a legacy of change, one driven by law, powered by unity, and sustained by truth. This journey proves that one voice, when raised with purpose, can change an entire system. Don't forget to subscribe for more real, powerful stories that shape America's future.